Am I being asked to be someone I'm not? Do I have to give up my cultural identity in order to be successful?
Hey everybody, welcome to Identity Unveiled. We are a lifestyle platform that talks about career, beauty, health, and to help support the advancement of Asian American women to the executive ranks.
Chang is Senior Director of R&D at Procter Gamble. Procter Gamble, or P&G, is an American multinational consumer goods corporation. You've probably used their products commonly if you use Bounty or Charmin, brush your teeth with Crest products, or wash your dishes with Dawn. You've probably experienced a P&G product. One I commonly use for colds is Vicks. And I learned that was also a P&G product. Well, Sue is an innovation leader with over 20 years of experience across environmental, defense, consumer product design, and operations. She currently has 32 patents granted with 9 patents pending and has earned several internal and external awards for innovation, mentoring, and leadership. She's a member of the organization 100 Wise Women, which is a professional trainer with the Society of Asian Scientists and Engineers. She's on the advisory board at the University of Michigan Department of Chemical Engineering and on the regional advisory board at the University of Miami. She's also a board member of a fascinating organization called Women Walking West. It's an organization focused on advancing education for women from across the globe. And this organization serves legal immigrant women in their pursuit of education and professional opportunity. Our story today speaks to the humble beginnings of a first-generation Korean woman growing up in rural Kentucky on a farm graduating to magna cum laude with a BS in chemical engineering and mathematics, and having contributed to a myriad of innovations in the STEM space and the growth across 9 of Procter & Gamble's billion-dollar brands in the global market. Thank you, Sue, for being with us here today.
Thank you for having me.
So let's just get to our first question. With all these patents and the work that you've done in STEM, just curious, where did your passions for innovation in the sciences start?
I have to take it back to how I grew up in this, what I would call resource scarce, small cow town in rural Kentucky. It's a place called Vine Grove, like leaves on a vine. I don't know that anyone's ever really heard of it. So in this place back in the 70s, there were more cows than there were people. And when you're in that kind of environment, you do spend a lot of time just studying things and figuring out how to make little things work, how to make things better, how to be resourceful with what you have. And for me, that was a lot of days of figuring out how to make do with what we had and figure out how to make things work, not being able to actually go and buy these things. So I love that. I had a knack for figuring things out, for tinkering, if you will. And the more that I was exposed to different subjects in school, I found that I had a natural aptitude for engineering and science. And I just kept going down that path. So for me, it was challenging. It was personally challenging. And I think that that was very motivating for me, is proving to myself that I could actually accomplish that degree, become something that had a steady income. And I think really when you were saying a little bit of who I am, back then I don't know that I would have ever thought this would be where I am today.
And as an Asian American, how was it like growing up in Kentucky? I know there was a story you said about being the first minority they've seen in school. What was that like?
Wow. It was, I would say it was unusual. And to talk about it now, I think a lot of people would be a bit appalled But for me, I don't know that we knew anything different. We knew we were different, but I don't know that we felt like we had options not to be per se. Um, Being the first minority, obviously people people weren't sure what to think. They stared a lot. And the first day of class going to elementary school, in this in our school building, the music teacher, her name was Mrs. Patterson. She was exceptionally kind. She used to take us the first day of school to every classroom in the school and introduce my family to the kids and talk about where we were from and why we look different and that we may eat things that are different, that our English wasn't great and we still enjoyed playing. And so I think she really helped to demystify, or at least maybe diminish how big some of the differences were. And I, I do believe that 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 sounds like, oh my gosh, that happened every year first day. It happened every year for 5 years until one of our first African American families moved into the area. And I thought, okay, now it's your turn. Now it's your turn to have kids line up and want to touch your hair or touch your skin and know that you're actually, yeah, these are differences, but kind of neat differences, you know. So I won't say that it prevented, you know, any of the things that kids do, but I certainly think that it took it down a few notches. And I do think that that was a huge way helping um, of what allyship looked like, if you will. That was her best way of being an ally for me.
So fast forward, you graduate magna cum laude.
Mhm,
You now are a senior director at innovation leader with Procter and Gamble.
mhm,
What has been the most significant challenges that you've had to overcome to become the Asian American executive that you are today?
mhm. I think one of the biggest challenges for me has been uh, thinking that I wasn't as Asian as I was. Having grown up, gone through college here in the United States, an absolute blessing. But like many Asian Americans, there was a bit of a distance I created with my culture and my sense of identity, not really recognizing that so much of how I would show up professionally was derived from what I call my cultural imprint. The way that I would show respect, the way that I wouldn't ask my boss for time because I assumed they were busy, the way I wouldn't speak in a meeting because my boss was there. And so my role was to listen or be invited to speak. And these are ways of showing respect and professionalism, but in a company like Procter and Gamble, which is more Western culture based, those were behaviors that weren't construed as leadership. And sometimes within the minority community, within a company like P&G, we'll use the phrase no talk, no thought, meaning if you're not contributing in some way, whether verbally or written, we don't know what you're capable of contributing, right? So that understanding that no matter how smart I was and no matter how much work I did, if I wasn't able to add value in a way that would change and affect the trajectory in multiple moments, it would be difficult for them to see me as more than a talented engineer. So I needed to recognize where some of these behaviors were stemming from and start to resolve a tension of, am I being asked to be someone I'm not? Do I have to give up who do I have to give up my cultural identity in order to be successful at a
Did
company?
you? I mean, did you feel that you were giving up who you were in order to fit in?
Yeah, I'd be lying if I said no, because sometimes, yeah, absolutely. I felt that there were times where the model that I was being coached to live and be was a model that felt very counterculture to me. It created a conflict within that felt that might be your way of leading, but it absolutely is not my way of leading. And so a tension I had to resolve is, what is that for me? What what does leadership look like for me? But what I couldn't argue with is it had to be effective.
Hmm.
It had to move the needle. And so like any R&D'er, I have to study the outcome of the experiment, and then I have to change the inputs and evolve those inputs accordingly. And so meeting dynamics, my ability to influence, those are experiments for me just as much as the technology.
So then let me ask you, how has then your, given this personal reflection about trying to balance between how you grew up in a Korean household and then what you've been put into with this culture, how
Yeah.
have you reconciled the leader that you are today with your Korean culture?
Yeah, I have to say a lot of that goes back to my mom. You know, when I look at my mom, who was someone who in East Asian culture, you have to know she moved in with her in-laws, her mother-in-law, her husband's sisters, many of whom were older sisters. And so from a hierarchy, not only the male-female dynamic, but in the pecking order of women, she was at the bottom, okay? And to watch her hustle, just flat out hustle and adapt, she didn't give up who she was, and she didn't give up our culture as a Korean family. And she was a hustler, and my mom's a badass, you know, and also an anomaly because Korean women are mean as snakes and my mom is not, right? So complete anomaly in that regard, but a total badass in 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 with respect to how she understood people and how much she understood that she didn't have to sacrifice who she was as a kind mom and a hustler in order to get shit done. And I too learned a lot from that when I reflect back and think there's got to be a way for me to be who I am as a leader and be effective as a leader and an innovator. Why should I feel like I'm having to sacrifice who I am? So it isn't about saying, hey, these cultural imprints, they're not weaknesses. You know, being Asian, these traits, these themes of behavior, they're not weaknesses, but selectively you've got to know when to use them, right? And you have to know what new tools you need to grow and develop. And everyone in the span of their lives, people who hustle and people who accomplish, they're adapting and they're growing and they're growing new skills. And they're still unwritten, and I'm still unwritten. So I still have a way to go and grow. And I'm not going to stop doing that. So I'm very inspired by my mom and several other amazing women that I've watched and just observed through my life.
So Sue, like you, I grew up with a very similar story with immigrant parents, right? My
Yeah.
dad he came from a very wealthy family. They had over 500 employees in Korea back then.
Wow.
Um, but he refused to take any money from my grandfather, and didn't speak English, and would take a red pocketbook dictionary and pull, hey, can you sit down with me so he could practice English? Couldn't even finish a sentence without that dictionary, he said. Um, so he was juggling 3 jobs. He was your guy at Denny's, wiping the table. He was your stockbroker at 7-Eleven, who was also fighting off discrimination of people calling him Ching. Luckily, he was a black belt taekwondo, um, but he juggled 3 jobs to support me, to support our family. At that time, we lived in a 1 bedroom, no furniture. We had newspaper on the ground. Luckily, the days our car worked, it was great. But like our parents achieved that American dream,
Yeah.
and today I still admire, yeah, how he was able to adapt so fluidly still today. And I grew up so close with him, seeing how people were really mean to him, would make fun of him, not because of his personality, but because of the grit that he had. He had to become a hustler. He had to be aggressive, but people would discount that. So I 100% connect with you on and admire how our parents had to hustle, and like you said, the traits that they had to create to cut themselves out. Yeah.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing that, Diane. I mean, there are so many powerful stories of our families and of the people who gave us a platform for us to be where we are, and what a blessing that is. The grit, the ability not just to excel at something that they had a, a position of zero English, zero income and employment, right? Zero familiarity with what the social norms are. And they experimented and they iterated and they persisted despite the insults and the hurdles and the barriers and the challenges. And that's incredible resilience.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I think about that, sometimes I get bogged down in whatever shit has happened in my last week. Man, what a pity party. There's nothing that moves me past and pushes me into the right mindset than that reflection. And I think about what is required of me in the moment in my practice of resilience so that I can continue my story of rising above my circumstances, because I too have had different challenges and barriers. Growing up with one foot in a Korean home and one foot in a figure it out world, right? And then becoming a professional and trying to figure out not just how to be either or, but a both and everything in between. And situationally, that's how I navigate. I figure out a rhythm. I figure out what I need, what tool I need, what tool I got to go get, what tool I got to sharpen, and that's my everyday hustle.
I love how you talk about resilience. We talk a lot about that at Identity Unveiled. And I moved to New York a year ago. And I actually, on Facebook, you get a message reminder, oh, a year ago, you were here in this memory. And I wrote about Asian hate. And I wrote about how I walked on the streets of New York and I saw a woman's eyes. They wouldn't make eye contact with you. They had so much fear.
Yeah.
Let's fast forward a year today, we're seeing crimes on a weekly basis,
Yeah.
deaths, grisly violence.
Yeah.
When are they going to stop?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about Asian hate and what's going on right now?
I think I think it's obviously horrible, and it's one of many hates that are happening. Um, and it's always been there, right, Diane? Um, when you look at the history of Asian Americans in this country, it's always been there. We just didn't call it that. At one point, it was very acceptable. At one point, if you look at the history of what was acceptable, it was discrimination and treating people because of where they were from or the color of their skin or some kind of feature, treating them as less than was very, very acceptable, right? And now that we demand equity and equality, we can easily label it as hate because we can't fathom how you could, without knowing that person as an individual, how you could not only think of them as less than, but you could physically contemplate harm and injury. And that's devastating, right? So, and it's real. It's real in my community. It's been real since I moved. You would have thought that being a minority in a place like rural Kentucky, like be careful where you go, right? I felt very safe. We didn't have the cell phones. I remember my mom, I would just go to a random neighbor's house and they would let me in and serve me cake, right? And my mom would knock on doors looking for her daughter in people's houses. If that were to happen today, you'd never see that kid again, right? But that was normal growing up for me then and there. In this neighborhood where I live, and even since I've been in Cincinnati, I have been on the receiving end, unfortunately, of slurs and even at a major amusement park, standing in line with my daughter when she was young, a guy behind me thought it'd be funny to set my hair on fire. Working in my front yard, up by the edge of the road, guys driving by hurled empty beer bottles at me, used condoms. It's happened, right? It's happened to me. I walk the street, I go shopping in the grocery store. They don't see an executive leader from P&G. They see a petite Asian female. And that belief system corrupts a decision in the moment where, and my daughter will tell you, I carry a weapon everywhere I go. And that's real. That is real for me. And there's a part of me that's thankful that my daughter looks a little less Asian because I think she's actually safer.
Yeah. This is why, we want to get your stories out. And for that reason, we were very passionate, sharing the same or similar experiences. What can we do to put more Asian American women in executive, powerful positions and so forth?
I think because we can be vulnerable and on the receiving end, because we can be the only fill in the blank woman, minority in the room. And because there aren't many others who might ask the question about, what about Sue? What about Diane in the advancement conversations? We need allyship. And so creating movements like what Identity Unveiled is doing, what other organizations are doing by helping not just clear the path for the individual, but by changing belief systems and by modeling through behavior as well as words, how giving somebody else a chance isn't a zero-sum game. It doesn't take away from my chances. I think that that's how we get to equity. That's how we get to equality, is through that belief system and through allyship, more and more allyship.
Transitioning a little bit on the topic of allyship, I think one of the strongest allies that you speak about is your family.
Yeah.
And you're married to a former Army officer, two-time combat veteran, and a mother to 3 children. So how did you balance your passions in your career with your personal responsibilities?
Thank you. I think that's a question that a lot of women wrestle with. For me, first I should explain, my family's a bit blended. So, my son is actually my husband's son. So I didn't always have 3. That makes it, I think, easier. But even trying to be present and be a part of forging some of the moments and the important lessons that I want to create from my family, and the experiences and memories I want to create with my family, made me think through periods of choices. And oftentimes Asian women choose everyone else but themselves. And it is it is a practice that you have to, you never make like one decision and that becomes the way you do things. It's hard. It's hard through every phase. Every phase is different. And so I think about it in terms of rhythms. What is going on? What will be going on? What matters most? What do I need to be a part of? And how do I be the best mom, the best partner, the best volunteer, the best leader and innovator I need to be? What do I need for me in order to be that? And I am an acts of service person. I know a lot of Asian women are. And I have to practice serving myself, so that I can serve others. And I think that that is something that I think about deeply, especially we all know that moment where we're feeling out of balance. And we know something's got to change, and we don't know how we're going to make it change. But we know we've got that feeling. For me, that I have to practice in that moment, and I have to figure out what do I need and what do I want to make happen, and then what do I need to do in order to move toward that.
Mm-hmm. So Sue, what do you do to serve yourself?
A couple of things. I'll share something very recently. Last year was a total shit year for me. It was an amazing innovation year.
Mm.
But I gave to my company. And I think a lot of people inside any company would say, yeah, if you want to give, they will take, right? And in the world of work from home and hybrid and whatnot, and a global company, you can work 24/7. I was working about 18/7. And I was doing that because I felt a, an intense responsibility that if I wasn't doing it, no one would do it. And I felt that people were stressed. And in my acts of service mentality, if I could be there for them and alleviate some of the stress and help them with their program, or give them the mentorship time, or be that listening ear for them, that would serve them and it would serve the company. And I would be doing my part. And so I was mentoring a lot and giving a lot of time, and I count those in that hour. I was probably on my computer about 18 hours in a day. I slept very little. And I would tell my family, figure out dinner, figure it out. I'm going to eat a protein bar. And I sat in this chair every day, every week for almost the entirety of 2021. And for me, about October, physically, I started hitting a crisis point where I felt, inside initially, I was like, I can do this. I can do this. And inside, I could feel, oh my gosh, this mortar is cracking.
Mm-hmm.
The lack of sleep, the juggling and spinning of a million plates, and the caring for everyone else. And what I recognized was I wasn't caring for my family and myself. And when I thought about my daughter, who, because of work from home, our daughters are watching us and they're learning, is this what it takes? Is this what it takes to be successful? It's amazing the lessons that we teach our children. And for those of us who are Asian women, we all know the bad cycles of our cultures. We all know them. And sometimes it's really hard for us to break those bad cycles and create good cycles. And we don't have, it's not all or nothing. We could take the good cycles. And so I take that grit, I take that adaptation, that hustle mentality. But I went a little too far last year. And I took pause and I thought about, what's the lesson I'm teaching my girl? And we talked about that. She saw how I wasn't caring for myself. And because I wasn't caring for myself, I wasn't caring for my family. And she was starting to think, is that who I want to be? It's like, wow. You really, those are man, those are grab you and shake you moments. So when I think about how did I take pause, it wasn't like an in the moment aha. It was a series of days of like, come on, Sue, wake the fuck up. What are you doing? What are you doing? And for me, teaching those lessons are so important. So I had to show her also, how do you break the bad cycle? And you do it by caring for yourself. So I drink more wine now because I want to, not because I have to, right? You know, um, I, I would say I turn off work devices because it was so easy for me to get a text or a ping. I changed my notifications. And instead of me always being always on to work, I changed my notifications so that these are the boundaries that I want to practice and set and figure out, is this the right load and pace and rhythm for this time? And no one's come down on me. No plates have come crashing down, right? You know, and I started changing the way that I serve people. And I actually recognize how much more I can do for my family. You know, some of it is just changing my notion of how I'm serving others and getting rid of some of the assumptions that I was holding. If I don't do it this way, or if I don't show up in a certain way, these things will happen. And they're stories I was telling myself last year. So I'm rewriting those stories too. And it's practice. And I feel good about the shift in rhythm. And it'll probably shift again, you know.
I think that's one thing the pandemic has taught us is those aha moments that are creating those rhythmic shifts for many of us, leading to things like the Great Resignation, or just soul searching, where people are trying to figure out, you know, how to serve themselves while serving their careers and serving others. So, in light of everything that we've talked about today, what you've experienced with Asian hate, what you've experienced during the pandemic, what you've experienced as a child, which took you to great heights, great levels. How would you describe your leadership style today?
I would say it is one where I practice self-honesty. I'm my biggest critic, and I am the only one who knows how I'm really feeling and what's really bothering me. And if I'm living up to what I say I want to be, which is someone who gave all every day in the things that matter most, and someone who is always trying to be better than who I was yesterday. And I hold myself to that, right? And if the answer is no, sometimes I'm like, I'm okay because I'm giving back to me. Or I'll try again tomorrow, you know? So that is one, that self-honesty and just always reminding myself of who I am and that sense of purpose. And the second is I think about efficiency. You know, I'm a little dull this way, but I know we work with people, and I do care about people, although I'm less like my mom in that touchy-feely kind of way. I talk about death a lot, and, you know, and I'm very antisocial. But efficiency for me is being in touch with what that person needs to do the best job they know how to do. If it's innovation, if it's resources, if it is uh, giving them space, you know, or even giving them acknowledgement and recognition. For me, I want to make that interaction as efficient as possible so that we can move on and get shit done. And I think about that every single day. That's one of my objectives in every moment. This moment matters. How do I make it the biggest impact I can make it? and then I move on to the next moment. And that's my efficiency focus.
So Sue, if you had one piece of advice for women that are either on the executive track or aspiring to become an executive, what advice would you have for them?
I would say that self-honesty, that self-acknowledgement of knowing what you want and knowing whether or not you're feeling great about how you're making progress is so important for any woman who's working to ascend to whatever their goal is. And I do think that they don't have to think about being either or, that they don't have to think about being an Asian woman as a weakness. They can let go of all of that. But they really do need to think about iteration and evolution and adaptation, because we should never stop growing, right? And really, I think a lot of us would say that's who we want to be anyway. We want to be someone who always is working hard to be even better than who they were yesterday.
Well, Sue, thank you for your time today and really providing light on this hard yet achievable path to, as Asian American woman, to the top executive ranks. So be sure to connect with us on Identity Unveiled on our social media platforms. You can also learn about our website at identityunveiled.com, and we hope to see you next time.
Thank you for having me.